You suck with the vampire counts. Admit it. Go on, admit it now, or I'll steal your dog. And today I'm going to tell you why. Are your vampire campaigns more like trampire campaigns? Do you find sucking blood isn't the only thing you suck with here? Well, don't worry. Your bold progeny, Vlad Von Carstein, is here to look after you, and today we'll be diving deep into why you suck with the vampire counts, Vlad Von Carstein, and Sylvania as a faction. After today's video, your Vlad campaigns will no longer be so bad. My name is Blake and I bid you my fondest welcome to Blake's Takes, where today I'll be giving you my take on why you're just awful with the vampire counts. Is my take hot or not? Let me know in the comments below, and if you enjoyed today's video, please consider liking and subscribing. It really helps the channel out. The tragedy of another campaign befalls you. You watch helplessly as your splendid soldiers all crumble into dust before your eyes. The gate bug causes yet another hapless Vargulf to meet an unfortunate demise. You feel your hand hovering over the exit game button, willing the torment to end. But there is an unmistakable presence in your room, halting you from doing so.
You dare end your campaign early. You are the smell of the worm-cleansed skull. You are the regrets of those who remain, and the restlessness of those who are gone. You are the haunt of mortal years, the god of graves and age, of dust and dusk. You are Vlad, Lord of Bones, and yes, you may suck with him, but it is no matter, for you are death, and death is not the end, it is a beginning.
Reason you suck with the vampire counts. Number 1. You don't snuff out Zhufbar. You start at war with Castle Tempelhof. As a starting enemy, they're not much of a challenge. You have significantly more higher quality troops, coupled with Vlad, Isabella, and a vampire hero's melee prowess to lean on when getting rid of this initial punching bag faction. Now, the only fight which could prove a challenge to you will be the siege of Castle Tempelhof itself. My top tip to minimise casualties in this siege is to stack all of your forces at this position here, where there are no towers. Have Vlad run over to the gate and start battering it down. Then have your Vargeists fly over to cycle charge units who are on the walls. This charge is devastating as it'll knock infantry models off the walls and to their deaths, allowing you to clear out a staggering number of troops before any serious fighting even begins.
Nice.
Once you've conquered your first enemy, you're left with a bit of a dilemma. You're basically hated by all of your neighbours, and you are slap bang in the middle of it all. But there is one faction that directly threatens your capital, the filthy Dawi of Zhufbar.
Boo!
Now, Zhufbar as a faction will likely hole up in their capital, recruiting a large defensive force. But as Drakenhof is the seat of your power, leaving a hostile faction so close to it is unadvisable. They may attack you for one, or Karak Kadrin will confederate them, and then attack you. So my advice is to snuff out Zhufbar to prevent these two scenarios from happening. The trouble with doing this is your early units are utterly useless against dwarfs. So a direct siege of their fortifications is not advisable. So now we hire ourselves a bait lord to divide and conquer them. Declare war on Zhufbar, then position your baiting force on their territory but outside of reinforcement range of their capital. Have Vlad take up an ambush position next to them. What I've found is the AI will still take the fight despite the ambush failing, so you can effectively bait those sneaky little dwarves out of their hidey holes and give them a good thrashing. Now, Zhufbar's army is very dangerous, but once you've isolated their fire drakes, you'll be good to go. Do this by using your fast movers to pull apart their lines. Units like the Black Coach, Blood Knights and Dire Wolves will be very useful for this engagement. Once you've killed the Garrison Lord, besiege the Zhufbar settlement and claim your prize. Now, you should really sack this settlement, as this settlement is unsuitable terrain for you to inhabit. The gold can be invested into your starting province and more armies. Now you have a choice with Zhufbar. Carrick Cadrin will be bordering you. They don't like you, but they're not extremely hostile to you just yet. This is a good opportunity to make your campaign much easier for yourself. Fighting dwarves is not a great pastime for the vampire counts. Dwarves have high leadership, thick armour. The dwarves that don't have thick armour are immune to your terror-causing ways. The dwarves have a plethora of flaming weapons which will reduce your healing capabilities, and the land that they occupy isn't suitable climate for you to settle. So, to neuter this threat, you can just trade Zhufbar to Carrick Cadrin in return for their vassalization. They will bend the knee to the new Emperor of Bones in return for the smouldering ruins of Zhufbar. This will create a lovely buffer between yourself and other mountain dwellers, whilst also giving you another blood kiss. This is my advised course of action. Or you can go the masochistic route and leave them to eventually attack you, or you can launch a war on Carrick Cadrin yourself. But as I recently stated in the myriad of reasons why you shouldn't be attacking dwarves, I advise you to bribe them into coming to terms with the new order of the land. Once you vassalize them, they will likely break the vassalization at some point, depending on your campaign actions. But this should be a long time in the future, and at that point they'll be a much easier foe to face. They can surrender and serve you in life, or they can die and slave for you in death. The choice is yours. Reason you suck with the vampire counts. Number 2. You don't maximize blood kisses. Blood kisses. This primitive vampire mechanic will offer you exceptional faction-wide bonuses as well as some powerful lords. But do you know how to get them? You can obtain blood kisses in the following ways: by defeating enemy faction leaders in battle, by wounding or assassinating characters on the overworld campaign map, some technologies like the Lamian Book of Blood, vassalizing a faction, and in some quests. The bonuses which you unlock from blood kisses are substantial, so you need to make sure you're accruing these scarlet smooches. When you get to 3 blood kisses, you can unlock your first lord and subsequent faction-wide buff. I strongly advise you take the Lamian bloodline. The Lamian bloodline's lord has a perk called Queen Bee, and this, when taken, gives your agents a massive 50% extra chance at being successful with their agent actions. So your necromancers, white kings and vampires will gain a huge boost to their success rate in wounding and assassinating characters, earning you more blood kisses. That's right, your non-vampire heroes can also obtain blood kisses for their actions. Which doesn't really make sense, but hey ho. Isabella Von Carstein also has the Queen Bee ability, and it's a worthwhile pickup on her too. If you see any other faction's agents hanging around closely to your armies, it's always worth seeing if you can score a quick kiss from them by successfully assassinating or wounding them. Carrying out agent actions will generate the largest number of kisses, just because there is far more opportunity for an assassination or wound action to take place, so keep your eyes peeled for this. Reason you suck with the vampire counts. Number 3. You don't know how to level your lords and heroes. Vampire count armies are extremely reliant on your lords and heroes to be effective. The difference in combat potential between an army led by a low-leveled vampire lord and a high-level vampire lord is staggering. No other race in the game is as dependent on their lords and heroes, so here's how to maximize their potential. Firstly, as I mentioned in the previous section, you should pick up the Lamian gifts as your first blood kiss spend. This will passively increase the rate at which all of your characters will gain experience by an extra 20%. This is a must-take skill. No ifs, no buts. Get the Lamian blood kiss as your first blood kiss unlock, or you're effectively sabotaging your campaign.
And, I'll just get us started.
We'll need that to live.
Then I like to proceed 2 points down into the Necrarch skill line for the massive boost and Winds of Magic. The rest of the Blood Kisses spend as you like, but you must take the Lamian Blood Kiss first, then I strongly advise taking 2 points into Necrarch second. Now, with the Blood Kisses out of the way, we'll start with what skills to focus on. For every Lord, I go down the blue line of skills, being sure to pick up 3 points in Children of the Night, which increases all character experience gain in the army, and 1 point in extra replenishment rate. I then pick up Lightning Strike and a dump point in Necrarch for extra growth. Then I go to the capstone skill, Uncanny Prescience. This gives you an extra 15 Winds of Magic power reserve as a minimum. This is invaluable. There is no other faction in the game that is as reliant on magic as the vampire counts for both utility and damage. Not even Tzeentch requires magic as much as the vampire counts do. So having that extra 15 Winds of Magic equals to an extra 2 casts of Invocation of Nehek. It's really very valuable. I follow this for every vampire lord, except for when I'm recruiting a lord for an emergency defense. Then I'll pick up some spells to support the troops in the upcoming battle. Whilst your lord is leveling up their blue line skills, all armies need to have ancillary spellcasters in there. You need to have multiple heroes in every army to dish out your spells whilst your lord gets the supporting elements of the blue line tree in place. These will often be necromancers. Necromancers are excellent heroes which are unlocked from the charnel pit building. You should be building a lot of these. It only takes a level 2 building to increase the capacity of these heroes, so you absolutely should be building these everywhere. Vampire heroes are excellent, but apart from the Mausoleum of the Mad Count, which you can get at tier 1 in Castle Drakenhof, you won't be seeing many vampires on the field, as you can only get more of them with a tier 4 building. So necromancers will be the mainstay casters in most of your armies. Build up those charnel pits in every settlement you can, get it to tier 2, and you will boost the hero cap of your necromancers. Once you've finished leveling up the blue line of skills, I start working on the Vampire Lord's spellbook. There can be a lot of variability of Vampire Lord spellbooks with the bloodline mechanics, but typically I will prioritise getting Invocation of Nehek, Raising the Dead, then Wind of Death and Arcane Conduit. But Blake, we already have necromancer heroes in our army with the Lore of Vampires. Why are we getting more of the same spells, I hear you cry? Well, young Padawan, the reason is mobility. Necromancer heroes do not have access to flying, whilst all vampire lords do, apart from Vlad and Kemler. Being able to fly over some walls and drop some zombies on an unexpected artillery crew is extremely valuable. It takes 11 skill points, and therefore 11 levels, to get to the capstone blue line skill of Uncanny Prescience. Vampire Lords unlock flying at level 10 with the Hellsteed, so this works out quite nicely. At nearly the same time you unlock flying and the utility that comes with that, you can then unlock your spells. So your Lord will support your heroes whilst they're learning their spells, and then your heroes will support the Lord whilst they're learning theirs. There isn't any waste, as the flying mount comes when you start picking up the spells and the subsequent utility behind it.
Neat!
Where you go next on the skill tree is up to you, if you want your Lord to be a powerhouse in melee, or you want them to buff their troops. There's also unique lines of skills to consider. Some Bloodline Lords have excellent unique line skills. Some have pretty mediocre ones. It doesn't mean they're bad Lords, it just means that you may want to reconsider your priorities. So that's the Lord skill tree. Now, what kind of Lord should you select? For me, the clear winner is the Vampire Lord, or one of the Vampire Bloodline Lords. The reason for this is their utility. Not only are they excellent melee combatants, but they've also got fantastic spellcasting. The Strigoi Ghoul King is still a fine lord, but they access flying a lot later than their vampire counterparts, so they miss out on a lot of that versatility in the earlier game. The Master Necromancer has some interesting buffs, and the case could be made for them being a good emergency defense lord if money is tight. They have some built-in buffs to zombies and Raising the Dead, but personally I feel if you can afford a vampire lord, get a vampire lord. They can fight very well in melee, whilst the Master Necromancer cannot. Now you have a couple of other hero options to take. You have White Kings and Banshees. There isn't too much to say about these guys. They are solid, no frills melee units which can help on the front lines. The White King can wound and the Banshee can assassinate, so they can both contribute to blood kisses. They're solid additions, you should build their buildings and add them to your armies. The vampires have a few unique lord and hero traits which you should look out for too. Some of the best I've seen in game, so keep your eyes peeled for these ones. Master of the Black Arts, that gives you 4 free casts of Spirit Leech and reduces your chances of miscasting spells. Dread Incarnate, that lowers enemies' leadership in a region. And probably the best one, Lawkeeper, which increases your winds of magic by 8 and then subsequently by 1 per turn in an army. If you get one of these heroes early, then they can have a huge amount of magic in their army by the late game. So remember, your lords should go down the blue lines of skills first to get to uncanny prescience, if they're supported by spellcasting heroes such as necromancers or vampires, which they absolutely should be. The only time it is justified not having heroes in your army is if you're calling up an emergency army. Every vampire army should have multiple heroes within for spellcasting, damage, and support. Reason you suck with the vampire counts. Number 4. You don't know how vampire armies work. The shuffling hordes of the dead are yours to command, but do you know how to use them? As mentioned in Reason 3, your lords and heroes are the centerpieces of your armies, far more so than other races. They are your win condition for most battles. Your units serve to support your lords in a Xerxes-like relationship. Vampire units can be separated into their respective roles. They're either hammer units used for dealing damage and disrupting formations, or they're an anvil unit used for holding the enemy in place whilst the hammer comes down. You have access to few ranged units aside from mortal levies, some crossbowmen and some handgunners. But they're so few in number I'm not going to discuss them. They won't have any significant impact on your campaign. I normally only ever recruit them for emergency armies. So let's discuss your starting units. You'll have the choice between zombies and skeletons. There was a time when you could use technology to unlock free upkeep for your skeletons, and that was extremely potent, but now that time has long since passed. My recommendation in the early game is zombies. Lots and lots of zombies. Drown your enemy in the putrid horde. The skeletons, both spears and swords, are considerably more expensive, and I find them more fragile than zombies. They'll do more damage, but it's not their role. These are anvil units. They do not need to do damage. They just need to absorb damage and hold the enemy in place. Now, when they're available, Graveguard are an excellent upgrade. They're very well armoured, have a good chunk of hit points, and they'll actually do a good bit of damage if they're supported. You have Sword and Board Graveguard, who I put at the front to absorb missile fire if I'm going up against a ranged heavy faction. Then you have Great Weapon Graveguard, who are good for chewing through armour, and now you have Graveguard with polearms, who will reflect damage back to charging enemy large units. In my middle and late game armies, I'll take a broad range of the 3 of these units. They're not winning any awards for best infantry, but the Graveguard are solid for their cost. So, in short, I take zombies until I can recruit Graveguard. I tend to skip skeletons unless I'm raising the dead for an emergency army. So the rest of your unit roster are hammers of various quality. There are good hammers and there are bad hammers. Firstly, you have dogs and bats. These guys are fast moving and they'll do very well at chewing on enemy ranged units and siege teams. You should invest in getting a couple of these per army in the early game to give you that much needed speed and mobility across the battlefield. They really shine at pulling apart AI formations by threatening the backline, forcing the AI to commit units to either defend their fragile ranged units or watch them get devoured. Now, you start with a Black Coach unit, and this unit has some very interesting mechanics. When units die within its vicinity, it starts getting stronger. It gets more armor-piercing damage, ward save, as well as vigor reduction. The trouble is, it doesn't have the best mass. It can be good against zombies or clan rats, but anything chunkier than that can stop it in its tracks. So it really requires constant vigilance, or you're going to lose it. It's a helpful chaff lawnmower in the early game, but I'd never recruit another one. It's too easily killed, and it doesn't do enough without extreme levels of micro. They also require a tier 3 building, and I think you have better lower tier options, like Black Knights. Black Knights are available from the Ancient Armory building at level 2, and they're much more sturdy and easier to use than a Black Coach. Crypt Horrors are another lower tier but very effective unit. They have poison attacks, deal a lot of armor piercing damage, and have regeneration. I'd recommend them over a coach any day. Don't get me wrong, if you've got the micro you can make the black coach work, but I just think you've got better, cheaper, and easier to use options. Then, as you proceed down the tech tree, you can get access to some truly excellent hammers, like Blood Knights, Hex Wraiths, and the ever-popular Vargulf. Blood Knights are an anti-large, heavily armoured cavalry. They regenerate hit points with the hunger whenever they're in melee, and have one of the largest charge bonuses in the game. Their only downside is they lack serious armor-piercing damage values, but their absurd charge bonus more than makes up for this. You want to cycle charge with these guys. Keep them on the move to get the most value out of them, so you can exploit that massive charge bonus. Hex Wraiths are extremely quick and pack a serious armor-piercing punch. They're more fragile than Blood Knights as ethereal units, and they don't have the hunger for regeneration. But they can Vanguard deploy for some sneaky shenanigans, and they're available from a tier 4 settlement, unlike the Blood Knights which require tier 5. They're an excellent cavalry unit. I tend to pick up a couple of them as soon as they're available. The Vargulf? Well, I'll tell you about the Vargulf in a second. Now, in this section, I rely heavily on units obtained from the Grim and the Grave DLC, which came out all the way back in 2016. I think this was actually the Warhammer Trilogy's first DLC, so it's considerably lower quality than the newer ones. The units in question are specifically the Corpse Carts and Mortis engines, so if you don't have that DLC, I would heartily recommend picking it up to make your vampire games a bit more enjoyable, because Corpse Carts and Mortis engines do an excellent job of binding your anvil together. So this is where your necromancers come into play. They can get access to the Corpse Cart mount. I don't advise recruiting the regular units of Corpse Carts unless it's an emergency army, or you have a necromancer which doesn't have a Corpse Cart yet. You should have enough necromancers to satisfy all the Corpse Cart requirements you need. Have them join your anvil, as well as the Mortis engine. You want to blob your units together in an unholy pile of units like so. The reason you want to blob your units together like this is threefold. Firstly, so your troops will get the various buffs from the Corpse Cart and Mortis engine, like Rigor Mortis and the Reliquary Binding. If you get an unholy Lodestone Corpse Cart, an unlockable mount for your necromancers as well, then that will give you a passive healing effect which stacks with the Mortis engine's healing effect. Secondly, your troops become far more resilient when bunched together, due to models of different units being attacked. The damage from a melee brawl is spread much more evenly, so one unit of your troops is less likely to get broken. This means that you won't have to use your Winds of Magic for healing your units, which is perfect for the third reason, that it will encourage the enemy forces to blob around you, allowing the Mortis engine to rip them apart with its damage over time in the Reliquary Corruption, as well as opening up opportunities for your lords and heroes to deliver some absolutely brutal spell drops, like a Wind of Death or a Pit of Shades. The blob will grind against enemies, whittling down their health whilst regenerating your own. You can use your Necromancer's Invocation of Nehek to heal any units which are taking too much of a beating, toss some zombies into units converging around the blob to further drown them in a tide of undeath. I actually also really like Van Hal's Dance Macabre. When overcast, this will buff all of your units in the blob with extra melee attack, helping you to tear through units faster. Overcast, this spell only costs 6 Winds of Magic and will affect your entire blob, so it's a nice little steroid for your troops. Now, your blob does have some critical weaknesses, the chief among it being enemy artillery or units like Iron Drakes or Skaven Warpfire Throwers. Anything with explosive damage can really put the brakes on your blobby plans. Firstly, you need to identify these threats in the army before the battle begins. Then, you need to position your blob away from those threats. If you have some forests that you can take cover in, even better, but if you don't, just move them back and make sure they're out of range. Then take your Flying Lord over to the threat and drop zombies on them. This will prevent them from firing, and the zombies will attract other units in the area over to come and deal with the threat. If more enemies come over, then you can follow up with a spell like Wind of Death or Pit of Shades to annihilate a good chunk of the enemy. It's a useful trick. In the early game, before you have Flying Lords and heroes, you'll have to rely on Direwolves and Fellbats for this, which isn't ideal, but they will get the job done if positioned correctly. Now, spellcasters with bombardment spells can also be very dangerous to this. Look for things like fire magic casters or lore of metal casters. Get your vampire lords and heroes after them and neutralise them before the battle really begins. The AI does tend to be pretty derpy with their spellcasts, but you don't want a big bombardment spell hitting your blob. Now, a key factor to make this strategy work is the speed of your units. You want your anvil to hit the enemy first. Be patient, don't just control all and right click to attack, otherwise your faster units will hit the enemy before your blob of infantry. Your hammer units need to hang back and wait for your anvil to start taking hits. So select the units in your anvil and move them up in formation by holding Alt and dragging them with the left mouse button. Have them engage the enemy first and then bring in your hammers to start doing their work. Now to cycle back to Vargulfs, as opposed to a lot of my other hammers, I like to have the Vargulfs form part of the anvil blob. The reason for this is, despite them being fast moving and immune to flanking penalties, I do find that they can get easily surrounded and punished due to their low armour and leadership, so I keep them in my blob of infantry to dish out damage whilst getting protected from other enemies. I do a similar thing with crypt horrors too. I keep them in the infantry blob so they don't get surrounded and killed. They're like hammer anvils, or anvil hammers. Oh god, this is getting confusing. Maybe it wasn't a good analogy at all. Anyway, I want to take you through some example army compositions which I use to give you a flavour of how I build my forces. Early game army here, lots of zombies for a big cheap anvil to grind down the enemy, a couple of crypt ghouls as a cheap hammer to sneak and get up to some funny business, as well as direwolves to flank and get onto those Empire ranged units. The early game is all about cheap. We can see that the Necromancer here has access to Vigor Mortis, so he's on a corpse cart, but he hasn't unlocked the Unholy Lodestone yet. Now onto an example of a more mid-tier army. We're starting to see Graveguard appear in another army outside of Vlad's. It's still got a fair chunk of zombies in there due to financial constraints, and we've picked up some regiments of renown to fight this very dangerous Elspeth army, which decided to come and invade us. This lord was a dangerously low level as an emergency army, so we really needed some more oomph from the regiments of renown. Finally, a couple of later game armies here with a big Dryker showdown. You notice the Graveguard are far more prevalent. There's a few Cairn Wraiths in here, not my favourite unit. Probably some Raised Dead summons to pad out my numbers. Hex Wraiths, on the other hand, are a good choice. Vargeists, I'm really not a fan of. They're helpful in the very early game, but they die way too quickly in the late game. Low leadership, almost no armour, and pretty abysmal melee defence, so ignore the Vargeists and fill those slots with some other hammers instead. So remember, keep your anvils of zombies and later Graveguard in tightly packed formation with your Necromancers on their corpse carts and the Mortis engines. The blob will protect your units and maximise the damage on the enemy. Look out for units with explosive damage or magic casters, and try to neutralise them before your anvil gets into range. For artillery, a well-placed zombie summon will do this for you. Casters can be a bit tricky if they are terrestrial, but flying casters can be an easy prey for a flying vampire. Remember to have your anvil hit the enemy lines before you bring in your hammers. They need to tank the damage and tie up most of the enemy's forces. Reason you suck with the vampire counts. Number 5. You don't know how to heal. No, I'm not talking about what you shout at your favourite pooch. I'm talking about healing your undead legions. Healing is an extremely important mechanic to the vampires, so I just wanted to run you through the types of healing and how to most efficiently heal your forces. You have 2 types of healing. Regular healing, which will replenish the health of your models, and monstrous healing, which will replenish the health of your models and bring dead units back to life for you. All the healing types heal models, but not all of them bring back models from the dead. So there are 2 ways to bring models back from the grave to replenish multiple entity units like infantry and cavalry. Those are the Invocation of Nehek spell and the Curse of Undeath passive. That triggers whenever you cast a spell from the lore of vampires. All of the other types of healing, such as the Hunger for the Blood Knights and the Mortis Engine Reliquary Binding and the Corpse Cart Unholy Lodestone, will not resurrect models. So, at the end of every battle, you should be trying to heal up your forces. You should try to heal single entity units using the passive heals from the Corpse Cart, which will also have a Necromancer's Master of the Dead passive, and the Mortis Engine's passive. Simply have the single entity unit stand next to them and they'll passively begin to regenerate. Then, if any of your multiple entity units are missing models, you want to hit those with Invocations of Nehek to start bringing those models back. If you can, have those units blob around the Corpse Cart and Mortis Engine too, so the newly resurrected models start getting the passive healing. And any further casts of Invocation of Nehek will be more efficient in resurrecting yet more models. New models will only be resurrected when all of the currently alive models have full health. This is the most efficient way of doing it. There will be times when the enemy has nearly run off the battlefield and you need to get quick bursts of healing onto important characters and single entities, so it's fine to use the Invocation of Nehek in those examples as well, but bear in mind that if you don't get all of your models back in that battle, they will be capped at that number of units for the next battle unless you've replenished them on the overworld campaign map. This is important when you have to fight multiple battles in a row. So prioritise Invocation of Neheks onto multi-unit models that have taken casualties if you can. When fighting against other undead armies that crumble or fully demonic armies that get banished, you won't have the opportunity to heal blob at the end of the fight, so you should be trying to get as many Invocations of Nehek off as possible before the battle concludes. A final note on the Invocation of Nehek is it's always more efficient to undercast this spell. The cooldown period is doubled for an overcast spell, and you may be able to hit more units, but you can only heal 4 at a time, and if the spell miscasts, then you're going to need to heal that caster as well. I only overcast the spell in an emergency situation when multiple units are taking a lot of damage and are close to crumbling. It's always more efficient to undercast the spell with multiple characters casting it. Not only does it cost less winds of magic and doesn't have the same chance to miscast, but you'll also trigger more Curse of Undeath passives, which will stack, so casting multiple Invocations of Nehek will not waste a Curse of Undeath passive. Reason you suck with the vampire counts. Number 6. You don't know when you're strong. The strongest part of a vampire campaign is, ironically, when you're feeling at your very weakest, and that's at the beginning of your campaign. Yes, you won't have fancy units unlocked and technologies researched, but you have something that is only shared by your swashbuckling cousins. Instant recruitment of units into your armies from anywhere. The mechanic of raising the dead. Immediate troops into your army from any place at turn 1. To exploit this correctly, you need to be aggressive. You need to seize the initiative with this mechanic and drown your enemies in the putrid mass of your legions before they can develop tools to stop you. In the early stages of your campaign, there is very little your neighbours can do to cut down your hordes if you utilise this mechanic correctly. Move fast from enemy to enemy. Merge your units of zombies and raise more from thin air. Do not slow down the momentum. Keep swelling your ranks with zombies and take full advantage of this. This will give you a massive economic head start, which will springboard you nicely into the mid-game. By turn 30, all of the major Empire factions are on their knees begging for peace. By turn 40, we have the short victory campaign objectives. By turn 80, the long campaign victory is achieved. You need to keep the pressure up on your enemies and unite the Empire under your Red Dragon banner.
But this is just the beginning. You will command a great and terrible army. You will march on 1 billion worlds. You will march until every light is extinguished. Your enemies are strong, but you are beyond strength. You are the end, and you have come for your prize.
So that's why you suck with the vampire counts. Do you agree with my take on this? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed today's video, please consider liking and subscribing. It really helps the channel out. And I want to give a big shout out to my Patreon supporters: D, Joshua Krager, Dinkle250, Robert Diorio, Gonk, Paugus, Hunter X2, Veteran of the Long War, and Hatoris Kuz. I've been Blake, delivering my take. Thank you all so much for watching.